Can you ask an offensive question on drumming? Oh, that's interesting. Sure. Why is DCI drumming so unmusical? Oh, that's not offensive at all. Next level, Jeff Queen, 4-time world champion snare drummer. He knows what he's talking about. Please don't sue me, Jeff. I'm promoting your material. It's all one height stuff. You either play an accent or you play a tap. That's it. It's all rhythmic variation. And that's the same for like most everything that you're going to find here, like all these different method books, etc. It's all 2-height stuff. When you get into actual repertoire, like orchestral repertoire, or you get into, this is the more popular one, Cerrone. So Cerrone is actually playing musical stuff and a lot of like rhythmically very complicated things. Highly recommend this study guide version because it has like notes from the author on like, here's how you should play this phrase, etc. But once you graduate from this is like undergrad material. This is more like master students, like De La Cluse, Kais Clariana, or the Doze Etudes. They're concert snare stuff. Yes, rhythmically they're interesting. They don't have like hybrid rudiments. Like you're not gonna find a Flam 5. But musically, there's so much like phrasing going on in here where like you are just constantly moving up and down. You're able to play with the tempo, play with the music, etc. But with DCI, the goal is to play clean. So if you're focusing on playing clean, you want to try and eliminate the number of variables that you're going to have that would cause the dirt. So DCI lines focus on 2 heights. So they're just going to do this rather than do this, where it's going to raise the accents and the taps, etc., like what you might do in concert snare, which generally speaking, you might have a grace note that is half the height of your primary note. So in concert snare, I'd be playing like this, and I would change the spacing between the grace note and the primary note. So sometimes I might play more of a flat flam. Sometimes I might play more of an open flam, etc. In rudimental, would you want to do that? No. Isolating things out so that you are playing the most consistent way possible. So the grace note is always placed low, unless, you know, you march tenors and you have bad tap heights. Oh, snap. So this will always stay low. The only thing that changes is your accents and taps, but very rarely do DCI lines actually play with like crescendos and decrescendos because it's harder to do that consistently across a line of several people. If you are instead just like, hey, everybody play 2 heights only, then you just have to like, hey, keep this low, keep this high. That's it. So it's just more of a cleanliness thing dictated by the fact that the activity is judged, rather than like trying to make things as musical as possible, if that makes sense. So it's devoid of musicality and rhythm. It can be, not necessarily rhythm. Like rhythmically speaking, DCI and WGI are sometimes more complicated. Well, I take that back. Like if you look at like some of the Cerrone stuff, like there's some very complicated rhythms in here that like a lot of DCI lines would like never be able to clean. Like this, if we look at it, like it's like, wait, what? If you look at lines like Paul Rennick's lines, like Vanguard, Boston lately, the last few years, Blue Coats and Blue Devils, rhythmically they are very complicated and they're playing a lot of really fast hybrid rudiments. But musically speaking, no offense to any of those groups, but the one who is probably most musical will be Vanguard's line. Out of those groups that I just listed, they actually have contrasts that move up and down and not just you play at this height or this height. So it's not a 2-height system. Part of the reason for that is because Rennick is actually a classically trained musician. So he's good at the concert side of things and steel pan and like playing more than just rudimental. Whereas this is no offense, this is not like judgment being cast. It's just different styles, different ways of being. But the people who are more influenced by just the rudimental stuff, like specifically the military side of things, like DCI, and who are more influenced by drum kit, typically play 2 heights, as opposed to people who are more influenced by concert percussion, where they will actually have some phrasing, musicality, etc. to it. So that's a very long-winded answer of like answering why is it that DCI is not super musical. It's because they're focusing on cleanliness rather than trying to make it musically interesting. But if you look back at like 2004 Vanguard, they played Scheherazade. That's like a classic like snare audition piece that you'd have for like getting into an orchestra. So it was very musical they're playing, and they were so clean. Seeing them in the lot in 2004, they had so much volume with their playing because of how relaxed they're playing. But with Casella's writing, Jim Casella and Murray Gussick's like teaching and technique and whatnot, it just like created this perfect fusion. And there's a reason why they won high drums that year. Did I know that when you have a baby at home, it's not a delivery, it's DiGiorno? That is the most random comment that has absolutely nothing to do with what I was talking about, but I love it. Before I get to the next tip, I just want to say really quickly that you can find literally thousands of hours of free drumming play-alongs and drumming tips in the link at the top of the description or by going into my home tab of YouTube. A lot of drumline techs will teach the way that they were taught, and they won't necessarily question, did what work for me? Will that work best for everybody else that I'm working with? Maybe. What I recommend doing is asking questions like, why were my instructors teaching me that way? Why did they not teach a different way? Who else could I potentially learn from? I actually learned a lot from doing Muay Thai and the way that some of the instructors taught Muay Thai, and I was like, oh, that's a really interesting approach to teaching that I can apply into drumming, etc. Some other things that you can do is ask, okay, well, when it comes to performing, how do you know that that technique is true in that particular context? Why are other people playing in other ways? Who told my instructor to play it that way, and how did they learn it? Did they question things? Did they try it other different ways? The way that I'm teaching now, the way that I perform now, has come from a lot of trial and error and learning from many different people. Other people will do an approach based off of the people they're working with. So for example, if you've taught like 10 people how to play snare drum and all 10 of them really responded well to a certain approach, you might be like, oh, well, everybody learns how to do things this particular way. But then when you go to a group of like 100 people and you expand that scope, you'll realize, oh, no, actually that only worked for like those 10 people and nobody else, or nobody else in other contexts. Question not only why you are doing something the way that you are, why your teachers were doing something the way that they were, and why it may or may not work for the students you're working with, but also question why are other people doing it differently with different contexts, with different students, different performance requirements, etc. All of those things can have a profound impact on your own teaching and your own performing. Do you end up going with the values of the group majority or the group minority when you are setting the tone as either the section leader or the instructor? Are we going to have the snare line set the tone for the rest of the drum line or rest of the percussion ensemble? Are we going to look at the battery as a whole? Or are we going to look at the percussion section as a whole, or even the band as the whole? Sometimes I have taught in drum lines where the drumline vibe was a very different vibe from the band vibe. Now, another thing you got to be able to consider is, well, what do you do when the values might not align with your own values? It's not necessarily a bad thing to walk away from those kind of scenarios. If instead I would have stayed there and said, no, you have to do what I want as the instructor, this can create a problem in that you are saying, hey, I understand that you value this thing, but I actually value this other thing. You need to do it my way because I'm in power. And that can make it so that students are resentful and they might not want to practice, they might not want to perform, and they might just end up quitting. Are you making a choice for someone, or are you going to meet them where their values are and teach them in that way that they want to be taught? Regardless of what direction you end up choosing, some people aren't going to be happy with that, and that's just kind of like a normal process or a normal part of things, and then other people are going to be very happy with it. But it's something to think about, is what kind of approach am I going for either as a section leader or as the instructor, and how's that going to impact the people that I work with? And it could change over time. Like some people come into the program and they're just like, I'm just here to have fun. And then they really get into it and they're like, no, I want to compete. I want to become the best. And that shifts over time. That can happen with the individual and it can happen with a group. So one of the things I'd do with a metronome with a drum line is I would set the doctor beat so that they'd hear the quarter notes, and then I would slowly fade it out and then wait like a couple measures, or sometimes a few measures, and then turn it back up a little bit, make sure that they're still in time, and then turn it back down again. So that way they're also internalizing the beat and not just 100% relying on needing to be able to hear a doctor beat to stay in time.